Hello and welcome to another Blendini tutorial. I'm very excited today because this tutorial is the first video in my first series all about materials and shading in Blender. Upcoming tutorials will include an in-depth look at the principled shader, how to build procedural textures, the details of UV mapping, image textures, volume shaders, texture displacement, working with nodes in the shading editor, and more. To help you navigate to useful information, each section of this tutorial will be its own video, and each video description will contain time steps marking each topic or technique. This first video is sort of a clean slate overview of creating and assigning materials. We'll cover how to assign multiple materials to one mesh, the difference between slots and materials, linking materials to data or objects, and all the features of the material assignment area. With all of that out of the way, let's get started. As you can see, I'm using the latest version of Blender 2.92, but everything covered in this tutorial is valid back to version 2.82. So if you're working in an older version of Blender, you should have no problem following along. I'm going to hide the floor and axis overlays by clicking this caret to expand the Viewport Overlays menu and deselecting floor and the X and Y axis. Then I'll delete the light by selecting it, hitting the X button, and selecting delete. I'll also delete the camera. In order to see materials on our objects, we have to switch to material preview mode. So let's do that right now by clicking the materials preview button up here. The materials properties panel contains all the information we need to create and assign materials for any selected object. This panel can be accessed by clicking this button here. The Materials Properties panel is only available if the object you selected can utilize materials like this mesh or a curve. The Materials Properties panel contains the selected object's material list at the top, followed by a preview of the selected material, your material surface attributes and volume attributes, and settings that specify how your material should be rendered in either cycles or Eevee. At the bottom, we have a space to create custom properties. The Viewport Display section allows you to set basic shading to be used in the Viewport Solid Shader. I'll switch to Solid Shading and change the color here so you could see. Let's go back to Material Shading. The default cube has a default surface material with the color set to white, the specular set to 0.5, and the roughness set to 0.4. This space is the material's slot list. Each object will have its own list of slots. We'll talk more about this later, but think of the material slot as the place that connects a material to the mesh or object. Each material will need its own slot. We can add or remove material slots with the plus and minus buttons, and then add materials to empty material slots with this new button. The surface section has all of the settings for our material surface, which is the outside of the mesh. Click on this area to change the material's color. We can rename a material by double-clicking its label. I'm going to make this yellow color metallic by increasing its metallic value to 1. I'm also lowering the specular and roughness to increase its reflectivity. To assign two materials to an object, tab into Edit mode, hit 3 on the keyboard to go into Face Select, and select the faces you want to assign a different material to. You can hold the Shift key to select multiple faces. Then select the material you want to assign to the selected faces and click Assign. You can also create a new material from any existing material by selecting the existing material and clicking this button. Blender has created the new material, added 0.001 to the original material's label, and replace the original material in the material slot. Now we can change one aspect of the material, for example the color, and keep all the other settings the same. Alright, now it seems like a good time to talk about the relationship between materials and material slots. Materials in Blender are actually data blocks that contain material information, like the color, metallic value, or roughness value. Material slots are data blocks linked to an object that store information about where on the mesh a material should appear. One material slot assigned to a mesh object connects one material to that mesh. We can connect multiple materials to one mesh by assigning each material to different faces on the mesh. This gold material is connected to the mesh through a material slot. It's in the object's material list, but we won't see it on the model until we assign it to some faces, like our monkey head's eyes. If we replace the material, the information about where the material is assigned is retained by the material slot. We can have multiple materials assigned to one object, or one material assigned to multiple objects. When we made our new material, it duplicated the original material settings and took its slot. The original material is no longer linked to this object. Luckily, removing a material from an object does not remove it from your scene. Click this button to use the Material Browser. The Material Browser allows you to browse through every material that you've created since opening this file. Materials not assigned to any objects will show a 0 in front of its label. This 0 means it's a material assigned to 0 material slots. I'll add a new slot, select this yellow material, and check the Material Browser again. We see an empty space in front of the yellow, which tells us this material is assigned to one or more objects. When I remove the material from the material slot, we see the 0 again. Unlinked materials are deleted automatically when you close the Blender file. So let's save this, close it, open it back up again, check the browser, and notice that the yellow material has been removed. I'm going to give this material a better name. I'll also add a new material slot, duplicate this rose material, and then change the color. Usually, an unlinked material isn't something you want to keep around, but there are some cases where you'll want to keep a material in a file unassigned to any objects, but safe from deletion when the file closes. As you've seen, just adding a material to an object's material slot will accomplish this, but this is not always ideal, especially when dealing with complex scenes. The safest way to accomplish this involves this shield icon. When I click this shield, Blender treats this material as if it's assigned to a fake object. Notice when we check the Material Browser, the material has an F next to it. If we remove the material from our object's material list, notice the green material still has an F next to it instead of a 0. That F protects that material from automatic deletion when this file closes. Since materials and slots are different, we can use this X to disconnect a material from its slot. The slot data is retained and only awaits a new material, so let's give it one. Now let's hide this cube by selecting it and hitting H on the keyboard, and add a more complex mesh like this monkey head. New meshes added to the scene will not have a default material or material slot, but clicking New creates both for you. The first material you add to an object will automatically apply itself to the entire object. Now let's add 2 more materials from the Material Browser. To assign these materials, we have to select some faces. So let's go over a few of the common ways to select faces in Blender. Before going into that, let's take a quick look at changing this background. To change the viewport display background in Blender, we go to Preferences, Themes, 3D Viewport, Theme Space, and then Gradient Colors. Blender has 3 options for the viewport display background: single color, linear gradient, or vignette, which is a radial gradient. If linear gradient or vignette are chosen, Blender fills the viewport background with a gradient made out of these 2 colors. The gradient high color will be at the top of the linear gradient or center of the vignette, while the gradient low color will be at the bottom or outer radials. If single color is chosen, the gradient high/off color is used. Okay, back to selection methods. There seem to be an infinite number of ways to make selections in Blender. I'm just going to cover the ones I found most helpful. All of these methods work in vertex and edge selection mode as well. Hit A on the keyboard to select all faces, hit A twice or click outside of your mesh to deselect all. Left click to select a face, and hold Shift to add each subsequent click to your selection. Hold Alt while clicking any edge to select the entire row of connected faces. Hit C to turn on circle selection. Use the mouse wheel to control the size of the selection area and then click and drag over the faces you wish to select. Hold the Shift key or click the middle mouse wheel to deselect faces. Hit Escape to exit out of circle selection mode. Hover your mouse over any area and hit the L key to select all faces connected to the face you selected. With two objects selected, if we tab into edit mode, we can edit both of these objects at the same time. In this case, using A on the keyboard selects all of the faces from both objects. We also have these selection tools over here. Select Box allows you to click and drag to draw a box, and everything within that box will be selected. To add to this selection, hold Shift. Circle selection, which we've already gone over by hitting the C key as the shortcut key, is also available in this menu. Lasso selection lets you draw a lasso and everything within it will be selected. Selections only affect the side of your model that you can see. To select the faces on the opposite side of your mesh, use this X-ray button. With X-ray enabled, the entire mesh is visible and thus available for selection. Hit Control and the plus key on your number pad to increase the selection. Control with the minus key from your number pad will decrease your selection. Select Random from this select menu up here will randomly select a specific percentage of faces. You specify the percentage here in this menu. Hitting Control with the I key on your keyboard will invert your selection. And check or deselect from this select menu will remove every other face from your selection. The pattern will alternate between a number of selected faces and a number of deselected faces. You can control both numbers down here. The eyes of the monkey mesh are separate from the rest of the mesh of the monkey head. Each eye is its own mesh. We can use L and click on each eye to select them both and give them a separate material. Now I'll add a subsurface modifier, which adds more geometry to round off the model's hard edges, and I'll also enable smooth shading, which creates the illusion of a smooth surface. Smooth shading doesn't create more geometry on the mesh, but it does work better with more geometry. If that wasn't enough, you can also select areas of your mesh by material using these select and deselect buttons. Select a material from your material list, click select, and all of the faces using that material will be selected on your mesh. Deselect will deselect any of the faces that share the material that you choose that are already selected. You can assign a new material by selecting the new material and clicking Assign. Let's unhide the cube by clicking this closed eye icon in the outliner or by pressing Alt-H on the keyboard. I took a minute to add a few new materials just to demonstrate how easily we can remove any unused materials in Blender. Unused materials are materials that are stored in an object's material list but are not assigned to any mesh. Click this caret to access the Material Specials menu and select Remove Unused Slots. Any materials in the list that are not assigned to the mesh will be removed from the list. This menu also contains copy and paste material options, which will copy and paste material settings from one material to another. Select the material whose settings you want to copy, click Copy Material, then select the material you want to paste over, and click Paste Material. To use this feature, you must paste over an existing material, meaning we cannot paste a material into an empty slot. But any material will do, and even though the settings are identical, we now have two different materials. The last feature of this Material Specials menu, Copy Material to Selected, allows you to copy a material to multiple objects. To demonstrate this, I have a different file with a bunch of objects and a bunch of materials. Notice when I select an object, it is highlighted by a light orange outline. This outline tells us this object is the active object. The active object is always the object selected last. If you hold Shift to select multiple objects, the light orange outline moves with your selection. All previously selected objects are outlined with a dark orange to show they are still selected. Despite however many objects are selected, only one object can be active at any given time, and the active object will always be the last object selected. If I want to copy this black material to these objects here, I select the black material object last, then click Copy Material to Selected. When using Copy Material to Selected, Blender copies one object's entire material list to the selected objects, replacing any existing materials. The first material in the list to be copied is then assigned to the selected object's entire mesh. This cup has two materials. Both are copied to the second object, and the first material, this metallic black, is assigned to the entire mesh. If I change the order, making this purple material first in the material list, when I use Copy Material to Selected, it is the purple material that is assigned to the second object's mesh. Whenever you copy materials to selected objects, the active object's entire material list replaces the passive object's material list. Now I can select a different material, like this metallic rose, and assign it to the mesh. Notice that a number 2 appears next to the material name here. This number shows us how many objects, or users, have this material in their material list. If I select another object and add the same material to a slot, the material count increases from 2 to 3. If I click this number, I get a single user copy of the material. A single user copy is a material with all the same settings as the original that only has one user. Material copies retain the original material label and add a sequential 3-digit number to the end. Notice here, no number appears next to the material name. If a material only has one user, no number is shown. More involved models can have lengthy material lists, like this cup here. Blender gives us a variety of tools to sort, search, and arrange materials within the material list. With any material selected, these arrows allow us to move that material up or down the material slot list. If we expand this triangle here, we see a search bar. Enter a search term and the list will show all of the materials matching that term. We can invert the search by clicking this switch arrow and we'll see everything except what we've searched for. Use this X to clear your search terms. This down arrow will invert the order of the list, and the AZ button will arrange your list alphabetically from A to Z. The last feature of this area involves how materials are linked to objects. To explore this, let's take a closer look at how Blender manages the data behind the objects in your scene. When we create a mesh in Blender, Blender creates both the mesh data block and an object data block. The mesh data block contains information about the vertices, edges, and faces of your mesh. The object data block contains information about your object's location, rotation, and scale. When we add a material to an object's material list, by default, Blender links this material to the mesh's data block. But we can also connect a material to the object's data block through the same material slot. This allows us to assign two materials to one material slot. Switching between the mesh data link and the object data link results in our being able to switch quickly between two different materials assigned to the same slot and thus assigned to the same faces of a mesh. To demonstrate, I'll change the sky blue materials link to object. The material slot is now empty, so I'll add a new material and give it a different color. Notice the link icon has changed to an object icon. I'll quickly name this material. If I change the linkage for this slot to data, we see the original material now. Notice the icon has changed back to the data icon. Switching between them is as easy as toggling this button. If we check out the outliner, we can see the orange material belongs to the Suzanne object, along with the Suzanne mesh and the modifiers we applied earlier. When we expand the Suzanne mesh, we see the original green and sky blue materials are linked directly to the mesh. And that's it for a quick overview of assigning and managing materials in Blender. Thank you for making it to this point. If you found this tutorial useful, hit the like button, and why not hit subscribe while you're at it? Post any questions or comments below. I try to be good about answering them. The next tutorial in this series will include an in-depth look at the principled shader, which will be a big help when we begin to look at tips and techniques for constructing your own procedural materials. All right, have a great day, and I'll see you next time.